Hello and welcome to a very special edition of the Middle East Report on location here in Brussels in an apartment very close to the European Parliament. In this programme today we're going to be discussing the very important issue of anti-Semitism, and sadly in the past decade we've seen an escalation in anti-Semitism right across Britain and Europe as many Jewish communities have been attacked, and we've seen a rise in anti-Semitism. We'll also be discussing throughout this programme the growing danger of anti-Semitism in the Arab world and how that's having an impact on Muslim communities here in Europe. And today I'm joined by Gideon Behar, who's the Ambassador Director for the Department for Combating Anti-Semitism at the Israeli Foreign Ministry. Gideon, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the programme today. Can you describe for our viewers something about your background and how you got involved to represent Israel at the highest level of diplomacy? You're also a former ambassador to Senegal.
Yeah, well, in this position as a director for the Department for Combating Anti-Semitism, I'm already for a year and a half. And before that, I was Israel's ambassador to Senegal and to a few other countries in Western Africa, namely the Gambia, Sierra Leone, Guinea-Bissau, and Cape Verde for 5 years. I've served also in Tunisia for 4 years and in Berlin, and I'm a career diplomat already for the last 18 years.
Isn't it amazing, really, to think that you're in this very, very high position within the Israeli Foreign Ministry? You've been an ambassador, you've served in other nations throughout the world representing Israel, and that you're really fulfilling the dream of your ancestors. For thousands of years, dreamt of going home and being part of a Jewish state, and here you are today representing Israel at the highest level. And we've seen the re-emergence of the State of Israel, or reborn State of Israel, certainly after 1948.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that I have a mission, and I think this is also one of the reasons that I joined the Foreign Service, because I do believe that Israel has a mission abroad, and giving assistance to the developing countries, giving a helping hand, like what we did in Senegal with the development of agricultural programs, or in the field of health or education. But I also feel that indeed much of the security of Israel today depends upon its foreign relationship. I mean, each Israeli embassy, it's like, like a bastion of strength abroad to enforce and to strengthen our relationship with our friends all around the world.
What you say are some of the opportunities and also the challenges that the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs faces in conveying Israel's message of peace to the world?
Well, I think that there are many challenges. And each part of the world receives them in a different way. Where I have been, in Western Africa, for instance, people who are really yearning for cooperation with Israel, because they knew that Israel has a lot to offer in the fields of technology, education, agriculture, development, etc. I can give you the example of our large agricultural program in Western Africa, which is called the TIPA project, in which we have introduced drip irrigation to Western Africa to help the small farmers have their own crops and making their own livelihood. In other places, maybe it would be more economic challenges, if we to speak about our consulates in China, or political challenges like in Europe, or maintaining a relationship with the Jewish people, which is a great responsibility of our consulates in the United States. So, saying that, if I sum up this, you see that the challenges of Israeli diplomat are large, diverse, and it's a challenging job to be an Israeli diplomat. Absolutely.
I can imagine, but also worthwhile as well. Gideon, I also want to ask you about your department. Now, you are the Ambassador Director for the Department for Combating Anti-Semitism. Can you tell us why this department was established and your roles and responsibilities within this department of the Israeli Foreign Ministry?
Absolutely. This department was established to fight or to combat anti-Semitism. As you have rightly mentioned at the beginning of this program, anti-Semitism is on the rise in recent years, and there is a need by the Israeli government to put attention into it and to coordinate international efforts into combating anti-Semitism, mitigating anti-Semitism. Another very important aspect of our job is Holocaust memorials, or keeping the memory of the Holocaust alive. This is a huge challenge, and we see that in recent years there is an increase in the awareness and the need to preserve the Holocaust and Holocaust education all around the world.
Recently we just remembered the International Holocaust Memorial Day, and we've seen this take place in the European Union and the European Parliament, and also in the UN as well. Do you believe that our world leaders and also our political representatives are really taking the issue of anti-Semitism seriously, or are they just paying lip service to the Shoah?
I think that many people are really committed to the issue of keeping the memory of the Holocaust alive. I have been yesterday at the European Commission at a ceremony, and I've heard the speech of Ms. Reding, who is responsible for human rights and also for the issues of Holocaust. And there was also an opening of an exhibition there at the European Parliament. There was last week. And the issue of the International Memorial Day is picking up. You know that the United Nations has adopted a resolution in 2006 to commemorate it. And every year we see more countries adhering to this resolution. And I would say that today, around the 27th of January, there are hundreds of ceremonies to commemorate the Holocaust or the Shoah around the world. We can go to places even as far as Vietnam, Myanmar, India, Mumbai, New Delhi, where people do services, do ceremonies, mention the Holocaust, in countries like Kenya, Senegal, where 2,000 people have participated also in a ceremony to commemorate this event. So all by all, we see a real increase in the desire to learn and to preserve the Holocaust. I can also mention that our department of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs with Yad Vashem, which is the biggest Shoah institute in the world, which is located in Jerusalem, together we collaborate to bring educators to Israel to study about the Shoah. Last year there were more than 67 groups like that came to Israel, mainly from Europe. But we see today an increase in the desire of people to learn about it, to learn about the Shoah. We just have opened this month a course of 23 educators from New Zealand. They came all the way from New Zealand to spend 10 days in Israel to study about the Holocaust. Another course that started a month ago was from India, where 20 educators and academicians came from India also to study about the Holocaust. And it's fascinating to see their feelings while they arrive, and how their feelings have changed after visits in Yad Vashem and studying about the horrors of the Holocaust and anti-Semitism.
I mean, personally for myself, I've had the opportunity now to interview 5 survivors of the Shoah. And one thing, what happens when you actually interview a survivor and they tell their story, is almost as if you go through their story, which makes you then more passionate that more and more people should know about the dangers of the Holocaust, why it happened, and why we have to remember those 6 million precious Jewish lives that were murdered at the hands of the Nazis, to really show that it's not just the Jewish community that's affected by anti-Semitism, but it affects society as a whole, as a large.
Absolutely. We always say that anti-Semitism is the top of the iceberg. Beneath it, you can find lots of social problems, economic problems, or political problems. And then when these problems emerge, immediately the first thing that they touch upon is Jews or anti-Semitism. And in times of political upheaval or economic crisis, then you see immediately a rise in anti-Semitism.
Also, I think it's important that we define the meaning of the term anti-Semitism, because many Jewish people, particularly in the United States, are wanting to rename the term or redefine the term as Jew hatred or Judeophobia. Do you believe that anti-Semitism is still the correct term to use when it comes to persecution and attacks on the Jewish people?
I think it is the right term because it is the most widely used term. Of course, you can use the terms Judeophobia or Jew hatred. And it's true that not only Jews are Semites, are also Arabs and Ethiopians and others who are Semites. But I think that the term, the terminology has already so much sticked to the issue of Jew hatred that we should continue to use it.
Gideon, how is anti-Semitism represented by the far right, also the hard left, and by Islamic extremists?
Well, indeed, you are mentioning a few kinds of anti-Semitism, and indeed anti-Semitism today has many faces. You can find anti-Semitism which belongs to the radical right or Nazi or neo-Nazi groups, anti-Semitism which emanates from the far left, radical left, other from Islamic groups, but you have also anti-Semitism widely on the internet, or in football games, or in sport, or in the academia, in campuses, and in other places. But I would say that there are today 4 or 5 main kinds of anti-Semitism. The first one is the one which is coming from the extremist right. You see today parties like the Jobbik party in Hungary, which is the 3rd largest party in the parliament, which is openly anti-Semites. Just recently, there was a statement by a parliamentarian from this party saying that one should count the number of Jews in the government to see because they are a threat for the national security of Hungary. Another example is a party called the Golden Dawn in Greece, which is a neo-Nazi party with neo-Nazi symbols, hymns, ideology and culture, which also to a large extent is xenophobic, racist and anti-Semite. Another party like that is Svoboda in the Ukraine, which just last month entered into the parliament after the elections with approximately 10% of the vote. So we see that, again, anti-Semitism is becoming legitimate in the discourse of parliamentarian lives in few countries in Europe. And this is of great concern for us. The anti-Semitism, traditional one, which is coming from the left, is more associated today with the BDS movement, the movement which would like to annihilate Israel, to boycott Israel, or against the Zionist movement. These kinds of amalgam between left and anti-Israeli sentiments is strong, but to a lesser degree when it comes to anti-Semitism. A new sort and very important source of anti-Semitism is Arab anti-Semitism, unfortunately. This is also a new creation. Arab or Islamic anti-Semitism is a new creation which brings together narratives from the Islamic religion, influences of European anti-Semitism from the 19th century, like the books The Elders of Zion, like the blood libels that the Jews prepare matzah breads from the blood of Christian children, with another component which is Nazi propaganda during the Second World War, and also hatred toward the state of Israel. And this is also a serious problem. This is also the reason that brought me here to Brussels this week, to bring up the awareness of decision makers within the European Commission, with the European Parliament, to the problem of this increasing problem. If we are looking at what's going on within the Middle East in the wake of the so-called Arab Spring, we know already that it's not a spring anymore, it's a winter, and even a harsh winter which doesn't want to end even. Then we see that the developments in the Middle East have brought into power groups like the Muslim Brothers, like Anahda party with Rashid Ranushi, who for many years was exiled in London, brought these people into power. And these groups have a radical ideology toward the West, toward democracy, but also toward Jews. And there is a rise in Arab anti-Semitism in the Middle East. And this poses a real threat not only for Israel, but also for Jewish communities in Europe. And this is a very important point, since a big portion of anti-Semitism that threatens today Jewish communities in Western Europe emanates from immigrants from the Middle East and North Africa. And together with the ideas and ideology which is exported from the Middle East and North Africa to Europe comes also this ideology of hating Jews and anti-Semitism. And if we take a country like England, for instance, the United Kingdom, we see that unproportionally the number of anti-Semite incidents are coming from this milieu. Also, if we take France, for instance, almost 100% of anti-Semite attacks today, harassments, spilling on Jews, calling them names, is coming also for Muslims and Arab communities in Western Europe. It's not saying that all Muslims are like that, and I think that most of Muslim people would like to live peacefully, of course, in Europe. But unfortunately, the majority of these incidents are coming today from these communities, and we think that there is a need to take action in order to prevent it.
Absolutely. So my next question to you, have you had any success? Because I know you've been here in Brussels all week and you've been having high-level meetings, particularly with the European Commission. Have they been sympathetic to what you are saying about the dangers of anti-Semitism, not only coming from the far right, but also from Arab and Muslim immigrants here in Europe, but also in terms of their foreign policy formation towards the Arab world?
Yeah, I think that it was successful in the sense that people are more aware of the problem now. Arab anti-Semitism in Europe is a new phenomenon. It exists only in the last 10, 15 years, and now it has become an acute problem, especially after the murder of 4 Jews in Toulouse in France last year. In the past, people tended to look more at anti-Semitism coming from fascist or Nazi groups in Europe or from the radical left and not so much into anti-Semitism, which has its origins in the Middle East and North Africa, but exists already openly here in Europe. So I think that to that extent people are much more aware and they understand the need for an action.
And what do you think the main causes are of this new form of anti-Semitism? Is it tied into the economic situation that Europe's facing? I mean, Europe, particularly with the euro crisis, there's a lot of political instability, there's a lot of economic instability. Do you believe this is also contributing to the rise of anti-Semitism?
Absolutely, this is one of the reasons. Every time, history showed us that every time after economic crisis, there is a rise in anti-Semitism. You can look at Germany before the war, that the economic situation has contributed a lot toward the Jew hatred. But it's not only that. There is also a reaction in Europe toward the immigration coming from different parts of the world, which gives rise to the right-wing parties. And these parties, some of them, not all of them, have also anti-Semite components in their ideology. Another very important factor is the internet or the cyber world. I mean, you can find speech hates, anti-Semitism, racism, almost whatever you want on the internet today. Either it's in Google or Facebook or Twitter or Wikipedia in different languages. And since the internet is such an open space, luckily for all of us, but you can still act there and do almost everything that you want or one wants without limits. So it gives a free hand for radical groups to open radical websites, racist websites, etc., and to give a real podium for anti-Semitic speeches.
And also, if we look at anti-Semitism, and anti-Semitism is sadly nothing new. It goes back to biblical times, back to the story of Moses, and particularly the story of the book of Esther, that the Jewish people have faced genocide throughout the centuries, and this is nothing new. But I think one thing we have to make very clear, don't we, Gideon, is the case that if anti-Semitism does not stop with the Jewish people, once anti-Semitism pollutes or infests a society, then it actually threatens the whole of a society. Aren't we facing a situation now in Europe where if we see this escalation of anti-Semitism continue, then there's a great danger that Europe's liberal democracy will be under threat?
I think so, completely. And indeed, we see today the xenophobia that exists in many places in Europe. If we take again the case of Hungary and the Jobbik party, we see that much of their hatred is directed toward the Roma and Roma minority in this country. Or if we look at what's going on in Greece today, how they beat up people in the streets, the people that belong to the party, the Golden Dawn, then we see that their anger is toward immigrants. But also it has a component which is against Jews. So absolutely right. Anti-Semitism is a litmus paper that shows you that something goes wrong in a society, and the society has to awaken up and to take responsibility and to take actions, and not to say, okay, it happens to the Jews, well, it doesn't touch, it's away from me, let it go. There was someone, I've forgotten his name, who said about the Holocaust that first they came for the Jews, and then they came for the communists, and then they came for other groups, and finally and he said, each time he said nothing, finally they got him. Absolutely. If you do not tackle the issue of anti-Semitism within European societies, there is a real danger for democracy and European values, which were very hardly achieved after a terrible war here in Europe.
And if we look at the situation facing the Jewish communities, I mean, there's a lot of fear amongst so many Jewish communities, including here in Belgium. We know that the Jewish community in France is under siege, with a large number of French people making aliyah to Israel or emigrating to the United States. We're seeing attacks on the Jewish community in Hungary. There's fear of persecution in Sweden. And sadly also we're seeing this penetration of anti-Semitism in football games. And it was only in a recent game between West Ham and Tottenham Hotspur in which some of the West Ham fans were saying "Hell Hitler" and making hissing noises to reflect those of the gas chambers. We've also seen attack on some Tottenham football fans as well as abuse of Israeli football players, particularly in a game against Hungary. Isn't there great danger now that this is really penetrating mainstream society now, that it's moved away from maybe some of the far right or the intellectual left, and is now petering down to ordinary men and women across Europe?
Absolutely. This is the real danger today. Again, as I was saying, a few years ago it was very difficult to be openly and publicly anti-Semite in Europe. Today, it's, people do it. They do not fear punishments or criticism. And this is the real danger, that anti-Semitism is becoming again banal and accepted in Europe. And this is a danger, again, I'm saying, repeating that this is, first and foremost, this is a danger for European values and for the European democracy. And I think that Jewish life and Jewish communities could be best defended when the values of Europe are defended. I just want to say that during my discussions here, I told my counterparts that sometimes when I'm here for the weekend in Europe and I want to go to pray in a synagogue, well, it's very easy to identify it, because just already from the distance you can see that the street is blocked, that there is a police car stationed there with armed policemen. And then you have security cameras and heavy doors, and when you want to go and pray, people ask you for security reasons to show your passports. And I mean, this is not what we want to see in Europe. This is not the kind of Jewish life that we want to see in Europe. Life which is behind walls, behind barbed wires, behind the security cameras, with a permanent need to have security officers and policemen to protect the normal life of people.
Gideon, I very much like your views and opinions. Back in Britain, there's a Liberal Democrat MP called David Ward who's come under fire this week, and this is what he said. He said he's saddened that the Jews who suffered unbelievable levels of persecution during the Holocaust could, within a few years of liberation from the death camps, be inflicting atrocities on the Palestinians in the new state of Israel and continue to do so on a daily basis on the West Bank and Gaza. Isn't this new form of anti-Semitism seen here in this comment of attacking Israel and using the Holocaust as a means to create double standards, one standard for Israel and one standard for Israel's neighbours?
Well, it's very regrettable and very saddening. Unfortunately, these comments are common, and we hear them also from other sources. And, it's a kind of reversing the things. You take the Jews who are victims of the Holocaust, and you make them now the forces that victimize the poor Palestinians. What he has done is something which is unbearable, to compare the huge atrocities, the Holocaust, the destructions of 6 million of lives, with a legitimate struggle of the state of Israel. You cannot compare these two things at all. This is oil and water, they are separate.
And also, one of the important factors involved in this is that there's a misperception of how the Palestinians are actually treated. And if you have a look at the plight of the Palestinians, particularly those living in refugee camps in Syria, and in Lebanon, and also in Jordan, that's where the real discrimination is, and that's where the real apartheid is. And yet the world turns a blind eye to this.
Yeah, and I can add to that. The atrocities committed now in Syria, where more than 60,000 people are killed. And the reactions are what? I mean, very, very minimized. We see what's going on in Egypt and in other parts of the Arab world. Where is the uproar? Where is the criticism? Where is the action?
Yeah, sadly the world is silent. Also, this week there's been this really quite disgusting cartoon. I don't know if you see, I'm just going to wave this up to the camera here, that appeared in the Sunday Times, and we have the newly elected Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu building a wall. It appears to be blood of those of the Palestinians. Now, surely this is classic blood libel anti-Semitism that has no place in such an established newspaper such as the Sunday Times.
Exactly. This is the proof what we are saying, that anti-Semitism is becoming again a legitimate item on the public discourse. People have forgotten the horrors of the Holocaust, the lessons of the Holocaust, what anti-Semitism can bring about, and if such a caricature is being printed in such a respectable newspaper, it shows us that something fundamentally is wrong. Something fundamentally is wrong, and things must be done to stop it.
Also, do you believe that this is a contributing factor, is that Europe in particular has turned its back on its Judean Christian heritage, and so many people now, certainly young people, don't know anything about the Bible. There's no reference points to the Bible with the Jewish people in the land of Israel. Do you also believe that that is a contributing factor?
I think that if people knew more about the relationship between Jews and the Bible, and that Europeans and Jews share common heritage and common sources and common beliefs, then it would, of course, bring a familiarity into lives of Jews and Christians in Europe, and it will, of course, increase harmony and coexistence between different religions, of course.
And in your opinion, how much has Western anti-Semitism been imported or exported to the Arab world?
Well, to a large extent. If you look at caricatures today, I mean, that can be found daily on the Arab press, and you see how they describe the Jew. Well, it's a Jew that you see in Western Europe or in Eastern Europe with black clothes, Orthodox Jews, big nose, a Star of David, controlling the world, or like an octopus. These are all symbols and signs which are coming from Western terminology of anti-Semitism. Because in the Middle East or North Africa, Jews didn't wear black clothes or the clothes of the Jews in Eastern or Western Europe. So these all are imported ideas that came into the Middle East from the West, the blood libels, the belief that Jews are, there is a conspiracy for the Jews to control the whole world. All of these were imported from Western anti-Semitism into the Middle East and integrated into Arab anti-Semitism. Today, a different, a reverse movement is happening, that this kind of anti-Semitism, the new Arab anti-Semitism, is being exported into Arab communities in Europe.
And also, has Nazism been adopted by so many Islamic extremists, particularly the Muslim Brotherhood? And if we look back historically, there's been a very strong historical ties between the former Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, Ajmin al-Husseini,
yes,
and the Muslim Brotherhood. And have many of those Nazi ideologies now penetrated so much of the Islamic extremism that we're seeing across the Middle East?
Yeah, you know, the founders of the Muslim Brothers and radical Islam in the Middle East were to a large extent influenced by the Nazi propaganda. During the Second World War, the Nazi regime has produced many radio programs, was broadcasting daily to the Middle East in Arabic and Persian and in other languages, exporting hatred toward the Jews and a Nazi ideology. And this ideology has radicalized the ideology of radical movements in the Middle East, and the way they perceive and look at Jews and later on at Israel. If you look, for instance, if you take, for example, the Hamas charter, then you see that the Jews are blamed for the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, for the establishment of the United States. So, you know, there are so many things which were taken from Nazi ideology and Western anti-Semitism integrated into radical Islamic thought, which is very prevalent today in the Middle East.
And thanks to some of the excellent work being done by Memory and Palestinian Media Watch, we're able to have a look into Arab society, and you know, we can actually see through the Arab media, through their education system, even through teachings by prominent imams, the level of hatred towards Israel and the Jewish people has reached academic proportions and is actually comparable to that of the Nazi propaganda machine. Now, isn't there a great danger that this threatens not only Israel but the entire Arab world?
Absolutely. These movements are a threat, first and foremost, for Arab societies. I mean, they are limiting the scope of life. They limit the role women can play in society, the openness a society needs in order to be economically developed, to be technologically developed. These are very limiting. This ideology is a limiting factor for Arab societies to move forward in the 21st century.
And surely this goes down to the very heart of the Middle East peace process, and maybe some of our European leaders, including maybe the US administration as well, need to realise that if there's going to be true, genuine and lasting peace in the Middle East, then the issue of anti-Semitism in the Arab world has to be dealt with first and foremost, because isn't there a great danger now that we're seeing a whole generation of children who are indoctrinated with hatred and violence towards Israel and the Jewish people, that it's going to be generations before this conflict can find a resolution?
Absolutely. If you brainwash daily school children, if you have school material or curriculum without mentioning that there is a state called Israel, or if you, on the map of the Middle East, which is being hanged in classrooms, there is no country called Israel, then how can you accept a country like this? You know, it will be a very serious job to clean out this brainwashing and to have other ideas that will accept Israel, that will accept the right of the Jewish people to live in a sovereign state of its own. So this is where we see a great threat to the continuation of Israel, but especially the possibility of living in peace and in harmony with our neighbors in that region.
And are Western leaders beginning to wake up on this issue? Because surely this is the most important issue really facing the Middle East peace process, particularly Israel's relationship with the Palestinians and also Israel's neighbours, including Egypt, Jordan and Syria and Lebanon. That if this issue is not dealt with, then how can there possibly be a peace process?
I think that most definitely that the international community should give attention to this point and to this challenge. I think that they also share with us the desire for having a long-lasting peace in the Middle East. And if the issue of anti-Semitism is looked aside or ignored, then for the long run we diminish dramatically our chances to achieve peace, which for the international community is an essential issue.
And how much has the re-emergence of the State of Israel that was reborn on May the 14th, 1948, contributed to this rise of Islamism and hatred towards the Jewish people? As we know time and time again that the Arabs have missed an opportunity to make peace with the Jewish state.
It is a component in that kind of anti-Semitism. Absolutely, it's not the only one. and it's not the major one. As I've mentioned before in our conversation, there were also other factors. Anti-Semitism existed before the State of Israel was created. I just want to call your attention that the blood libels of Damascus that brought about the killings of many Jews happened in 1840. So more than 100 years before the creation of the State of Israel.
And also we've seen in the past couple of decades here huge waves of Muslim immigration, Arab immigration to Britain and across Europe. How is this contributing to a rise of anti-Semitism, but also threatens the peace and prosperity of Europe?
I think that approximately, according to data collected in the United Kingdom, approximately 30%, if I'm not mistaken, 30% of anti-Semites incidents are coming from this milieu. And I think that efforts have to be done in Europe and the United Kingdom and elsewhere to create an atmosphere of acceptance and tolerance, to educate for the democratic values of Europe. Because if a new immigrant is coming and he accepts and he practices the values, the real democratic values for Europe, the values that millions of Europeans have died for during 2 world wars, then we cannot avoid that he will also have tolerance toward other groups, other religions, and especially, of course, toward the Jews.
And taking Europe as a whole, the mainstream media across Europe and many of our politicians will tackle anti-Semitism that stems from the far right. But when it comes down to Islamist groups or Islamic extremists here across Europe, there's real silence, also fear about confronting this. Why do you believe that's the case?
I think that people are not yet aware of the danger of anti-Semitism coming from this source. There is also another aspect of that these communities of immigrants are getting larger in Europe. And because of that, there is even a greater need to do educational work within these groups. For instance, the issue of Holocaust or Holocaust denial. Holocaust denial is very prevalent among Muslims in Europe. Just recently there was a book published about it that shows you very explicitly that for many Muslims in Europe, the Holocaust is not part of their past or experience, and they want nothing to have with it. And this is a huge challenge, especially since in political levels, the awareness for the Holocaust is getting larger, as we saw during Holocaust Memorials Days in Europe.
And this is one issue that I believe very much our Western leaders across Europe need to tackle, because so many of our places across Europe have become no-go zones, really, become such a strong Muslim-controlled territories with implementation of Sharia law, what have you, that this is putting fear into the police and into the politicians. Is there greater programs that could be done in terms of educational programs that can be reaching out to the Muslim communities across Europe to make them realise Europe's responsibility for what happened on this continent over 70 years ago, in which over 6 million precious Jewish lives were murdered at the hands of the Nazis, and how Europe will not tolerate nor accept anti-Semitism?
Absolutely. I think that each European member state should adopt its own strategy according to its own specific conditions, how to forward educational programs, and how to create also an atmosphere that will bring together people into dialogue. This is very important. Another important aspect or instrument that should be used is that there is zero acceptance for radical leaders, for fundamentalistic leaders who openly challenge European values or they are anti-Semite. these actions also should be duplicated by the European Union as a whole.
And how much impact would you say that leaders like Iran's President Ahmadinejad, who calls for the destruction of the State of Israel, genocide against the Jewish people, also denies the Holocaust? You mentioned the Hamas Covenant Charter, in which not only do they call for the destruction of the State of Israel, but a genocide against the Jewish people worldwide. We've had statements by the leader of Nasrallah, of Hezbollah, saying he's happy for all the Jews to make aliyah to Israel because all the Jews can be destroyed in one single place around the world. Now, these statements are horrific. They sound out of something that the Nazis would say, and yet there's international apathy in confronting the words that these Arab leaders and terrorism leaders are actually saying. What impact is this having on, say, Muslim communities here across Europe?
Well, it's very hard to say. I cannot tell you exactly, but the point that you have mentioned about Iran is a very critical one, because Iran today is a main source of propagating anti-Semitism in the world, and especially in the Middle East. Iran is the only country in the world that has as an ideology and a policy state anti-Semitism. There is no other state in the world that its elected government or acting government has as a policy anti-Semitism or Holocaust denial. And Iran actively promotes anti-Semitism in the Middle East and elsewhere, promotes Holocaust denial. We have seen the 2006 meeting or summit in Tehran of Holocaust deniers. Iran has something that would probably surprise many people. It has caricature websites for Holocaust denial. And just recently, they've announced that they will have an international competition for caricatures on the issue of Holocaust denial. If you look at the state television of Iran, the state television produces every year films which are anti-Semite, which are broadcasted not only in Iran, but are broadcasted or translated into Arabic or other languages. Iran has opened channels and internet websites in Spanish and in other languages. Iran is in tie with anti-Semite forces like the Jobbik Party in Hungary, like radical left in Latin America. So you see that for Iran there is a real effort which is being put, and resources which are being put into Jew hatred and anti-Semitism.
Gideon, you're the director for combating anti-Semitism at the Israeli Foreign Ministry based in Jerusalem. What policy recommendations can you suggest to our political leaders across Europe and our political representatives in order to confront anti-Semitism?
First of all is awareness, understanding that there is a problem and the problem is growing, and it must be tackled, it must be dealt. Secondly, to be aware that anti-Semitism is not a Jewish problem. Anti-Semitism is something that affects the whole society, and the society, the press, the media, the government, and other structures and agencies and NGOs have to fight against it. If you have anti-Semitism, and it grows, it means that something is going wrong in the society and it has to be dealt with. I think education is a very important component to educate people for tolerance, for democracy, for the acceptance of the other, against racism, against anti-Semitism or xenophobia. Another very important issue is legislation, to have laws against discrimination, against anti-Semitism and racism, and of course against Holocaust denial. And then enforcement. One has to enforce these laws. They should not be a dead letter. They should be also used to pursue people who are openly anti-Semite and push forward this ideology of anti-Semitism. I think that also on the external political level, it's in the interest of Europe to come toward when it deals with Arab governments in the Middle East and tell them that anti-Semitism is not accepted. Anti-Semitism in the Middle East is exported to their countries, should be dealt with in the Middle East.
And what are the dangers for Europe if they don't take your recommendation seriously and start implementing policies that will put an end to the rise of anti-Semitism across Europe?
Well, I think that then there is a real danger for continuation of Jewish life in Europe. I think that Jewish life is part of Europe, is part of European culture, is part of European life, part of European literature and science, and if anti-Semitism becomes a danger, a real danger, and this danger grows more and more, then there is a risk for the continuation of Jewish life in Europe.
What can Christians do to really stand with Israel and the Jewish people and really make a stand against anti-Semitism?
Show support, condemn acts of anti-Semitism, improve the atmosphere, convince governments that actions must be taken, putting efforts into combating anti-Semitism.
And Gideon, do you have a message for our viewers at all?
Well, that one should not look at this problem as a deterministic one. Of course, Jew hatred or anti-Semitism is the longest existing form of racism, but that with God's help we shall also overcome this problem, and that we are all brothers and sisters, we all belong to, we are all one humankind, we are all ancestors of Adam and Eve, and we should have a positive outlook at life and life of humanity as a whole.
Yeah, down to about last 2.5 minutes of the interview, Gideon, but I'd really like to ask you this question. Isn't it really with the re-establishment of the State of Israel, and that the State of Israel provides a safe haven for Jewish communities throughout the world, that they can come to a place where they can practice their Jewish faith, they can live in peace and safety? How much has the State of Israel contributed to providing safe haven for the Jews, but also as a means of confronting anti-Semitism?
Well, you know, when the State of Israel was established, we said never again. Never again for the Holocaust, never again for the persecution of Jews, never again for killing of Jews. And we have our own state, and Jews are not, around the world, are not alone anymore. And together with our Christian friends, and with many other friends in the world, we feel more assured, and we know that the future, although the challenges of anti-Semitism, is more secured today for Israel and for the Jewish people.
And isn't it wonderful that you in your position here, you're representing the nation of Israel at a diplomatic and a political level, and something like the State of Israel didn't exist prior to World War II. There was a very strong Jewish community in the British Mandate of Palestine, but there was no functioning Jewish state that would actually protect the Jewish people. And we've seen incredible stories of how the State of Israel has rescued vulnerable Jewish communities throughout the world, particularly the Jewish community based in Ethiopia, or those based in Yemen in the 1950s, and rescued so many of the Eastern Jews living in the Arab world.
Yeah, absolutely. These are excellent examples. I can add to them absorbing hundreds of thousands of refugees from Europe after the Holocaust, accepting the Jewish communities from Egypt and Syria and Iraq and North Africa. Absolutely.
And I want to make my last final statement to you, Gideon, that Israel represents a beacon of light in the Middle East, doesn't she? That she's the only true democracy in the Middle East, the only true place where there is multi-party elections and there's peace and security for those who find safe haven in Israel. And Israel's light is becoming brighter, even though the region is becoming darker and darker.
Yeah, I agree with you. Israel is indeed a bright spot in in an area of troubles, of strife, of ethnical strife, of wars and upheavals. And it's important that Israel will continue to exist in this place.
Excellent. Gideon, I just want to thank you so much for giving up your time, certainly a busy schedule here in Brussels, to sit down and discuss the very important issue of anti-Semitism on the Middle East Report today.
Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure. And I want to thank you all for watching today's programme. This has been a programme filmed on location here in Brussels, very close to the European Parliament, where we really see that European leaders need to tackle the dangers of anti-Semitism, because if we don't confront anti-Semitism, then our own history and civilization is under threat. And if the Jews are first, then certainly the Christians will be second. So we need to defend Israel, we need to defend the Jewish people, and most of all, we need to defend European civilization from the dangers and the evil that is anti-Semitism.